Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to another Live at 5. I am your host, curator Kevin Adkisson, and today I am coming to you live from the Cranbrook Archives Reading Room. It's good to be back after a lovely Thanksgiving holiday and my own small vacation. I stayed at home and stayed safe and FaceTimed my family, so I hope all of you are also safe and were able to connect with your loved ones, either in person or remote. We are back for another month of Live at 5s. Over the holiday, Cranbrook updated its internet system, and apparently Instagram Live no longer is supported on the Cranbrook Wi-Fi. So I'm glad that I found that out today at 5 o'clock. We are now using cell service, which we are in a bit of a tomb. So I'm really hoping that you can stay with me today so I can show you what I pulled out here at Cranbrook Archives. But if our connection is too rough, I'm going to be working with IT to make sure that I can reconnect to all of my social media channels over the Cranbrook Wi-Fi by next Tuesday. Today, I wanted to stay here in the archives and introduce you to a little collection of photo albums, 13 photo albums that were assembled by Henry Scripps Booth. Now, if you followed Live at 5 and are a friend of Cranbrook, you know that Henry Booth was the youngest son of Cranbrook's founders, George and Ellen Scripps Booth, and he lived here at Cranbrook. He moved up here as a boy. He studied with a German tutor until the 8th grade. He went down to the Asheville School for primary school, came back to the University of Michigan, where he studied with Eliel Saarinen, and then moved back to Cranbrook in 1922 after his graduation, where he then raised his own 5 children with Carolyn Booth. And then late in life, he helped to establish Cranbrook Archives, which we are in the Archives Reading Room. And that is why we keep this really wonderful 1920s portrait of Henry Booth hanging in the reading room in honor of everything that Henry did to preserve his parents' legacy and his own legacy in the building of Cranbrook. Now, if you don't know, Cranbrook Archives is a part of the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research, which is my department and what brings you Live at 5. And the Archives collections span the Cranbrook institutions, school science, art, as well as the church up to 1973, and then the family papers. But what I wanted to show you today are just a few of the highlights of the Henry Booth's own collection of personal photo albums. So there's a number of collections associated with Henry and later Henry and Carolyn. And they also have collections down at the Detroit Historical Society, which I'm just beginning to be introduced to their 6,000 family Christmas cards that are at the Detroit Historical Society. I wish they were here. But these albums, The Pleasures of Life, are some of the most useful and interesting things in Cranbrook Archives. There are 13 total albums, and they run from 1911 up to the 1930s. And they were assembled by Henry to document his own life, but also the life of Cranbrook. And so it features the Thornley House bookplate, which we've toured through Thornley a number of times here at Live at 5. And then on this wonderful black paper, he glued in and hand-labeled all of the family photographs. And so here you see a very young Henry Booth, circa 1902, 2 years before the Cranbrook property was purchased. And then you also see him with his siblings, Grace and Warren, and they're in front of the Booth family home down in Detroit, since demolished. So then we jump over to Cranbrook 1911. And what I love about the albums is not only that he assembled them and glued them together, but then he would also do things like color in the greenhouse, making the flowers red. And the reason these are so invaluable to me as a curator and to everyone who loves Cranbrook history is that they provide these really informal snapshots of life at Cranbrook. And so you see here, Mother and Florence, his sister and probably his closest friend, in front of Cranbrook House in 1911. They moved into Cranbrook House in 1908. This is where the twin cottage is, where some of the artists and residents of the Academy now live. You see here Florence leaning against the wall of Cranbrook House, and that behind her is the old water tower. That the tower is still there, but the top piece, the water basin, has been removed. Great question, Lynette. All of these photo albums are in the process of being digitized. The first 3 or 4 are on the Cranbrook Archives digital image database. And so you can flip through and zoom in these 3 on the archives website. We're just going to go through just some of the first few pages. There we see George and Florence on the front door of Cranbrook House. It's amazing how little has changed. We could stage that photo again this year. And then there's all sorts of antics that the family get up to. And Henry Booth loved sort of ceremony and plays. And so we'll see some of those as I keep perusing. Here's his grandfather, Henry, who lived in a cottage that was already here on the site that has since been demolished, down by the Morris Mill. And this is the Cranbrook House before the library wing was put on. So you know now on the left-hand side, the Cranbrook House Library now stands. That was a pergola in the early years. Some of them are divided by these sheets of tissue paper, which keep the photographs from bleeding through to the other side. Let's see, before we stop again, let's see. Here's Brett, Butter, and Marnie, maybe? Some goats on the front door of Cranbrook House. I don't know what the special occasion was. Above that, in 1913, we see the Cranbrook Farm Group number, I think this is group number 2. This is where Kingswood School would have eventually be built instead of those buildings. The old Booth carriage, which is part of the collection now. And then European trip in the summer of 1911 through central England and northern France. And quite a few of the pleasures of life are European trips. And so this is how we know where the Booths traveled, what they saw. You can pair a lot of these travel photos with things that they would later either build reproductions of at Cranbrook or order reproductions of. Playing shuffleboard on the liner. They're on the Olympic here. Let's see, we'll skip into Europe. I think now we're in northern France, the cathedral at Tours. And again, if you're just joining me, we're here in Cranbrook Archives looking through Henry Scripps Booth's personal photo albums, what are called the Pleasure of Life albums. So they would go out west, and here they're in Santa Barbara in 1912. And then the house before the construction of the West Terrace, another picture that he's hand colorized for the album. Over here, I'm not sure if this is one of his photos or if it's something he acquired, but this is Cranbrook, England. Cranbrook Educational Community, where I am standing today, is named after this little town. Cranbrook was a little town in Kent County, south of London, and it's named Old English, where the crane lands, and it is where the Booth family is from. And so this is, that's Shakespeare's birthplace at Stratford-on-Avon, but Cranbrook, England is where great-grandfather George Booth had a copper shop. And so that is where we get the name of our little community. And I know they visited in 1902 and again on this trip in 1911. Here we see more goats. I've never explored why there are so many goats in the Pleasures of Life album. And then Florence had a real passion for dogs. And so here you see Florence with one of their favorite beagles, Prince, and Mike. And Florence actually organized Oakland County's first dog show in 1914. What's now known as the Oakland County Kennel Club Midwinter Dog Show, which is out at the Suburban Showplace in Novi, was actually started here at Cranbrook in 1914 by Florence. Here we see another picture of Mike with Henry. Decoration Day, which I know evolved into Memorial Day or Veterans Day. I'm sure one of my viewers knows what Decoration Day preceded. And of course, the Booths were very interested in automobiles. And so here you have Stewart, not sure who Stewart is, and Warren working on one of their cars. And when they would travel to Europe, they would actually take their own cars with them. Another goat. I've looked through these albums a number of times and never realized just how many goats were here. They did have a lot of dogs, and they did not let them in the house. But they were clearly beloved because they appear so often in Pleasures of Life. This is the old garage, which is where the Oak Room would be built in 1918. Let's flip a little bit forward. More parades. There's all sorts of sort of family having fun images. Why don't you speak for yourself, John? This is some sort of play. Oh, he's now gone off to the Asheville School. So here you see Asheville 1914, his class year. And so these are some of his memories and classmates from his time in Asheville, putting on a play, The Captain of Plymouth. And then I love when he does sort of arrangements and he'll cut people out. So here you see his classmate or friend, Willis Day, who is performing a high jump. And I know there's a blog post that actually takes some of these Asheville School images and pairs them with current day images in Asheville. A trip to Wampler's Lake. Let's see. A silhouette done of Henry at the dog show in 1914. And you see some of the terraces that were built around Cranbrook House throughout the 19aughts and 19-teens. Here's the Grand Circus in Detroit before the People Mover would sort of ruin that public space. And the widening of Woodward and all the other horrors should be befallen upon downtown Detroit. So I pulled out a couple of the albums, so I think we'll go ahead and skip to Pleasures of Life number 2. And I'm going to put this camera down. So if you're joining me, we are in the Cranbrook Archives Reading Room, which is in the lower level of the collections wing here at the Cranbrook Art Museum. I'm Kevin Adkisson with the Center for Collections and Research, and we are looking at Pleasures of Life, which are the photo albums assembled, glued together. Many of the photographs were taken by Henry himself that document the earliest years of Cranbrook. And so here in number 2, we'll get to Henry's student days, and we'll see some of his friends like Don Baxter. What's neat about some of these student photos is that these men will be a part of his life for years to come, including designing some of the Cranbrook structures were from some of his University of Michigan friends. So I really just wanted to introduce you to these albums if you didn't know about them already. And if you want to see them in more detail, you should head over to the Cranbrook Center website, center.cranbrook.edu. Go to the Archives tab and then Digital Image Database, and you can search Pleasures of Life, and you'll find all of these three of these albums digitized. This is the construction of the bathhouse at the Greek Theater. The pool between the Greek Theater, which the photographer is standing in, and the actor's court at the back, that was the family swimming pool before it was filled in the 1970s to become a fountain. So here you see construction photographs of the Greek. And these are really the only photographs of this type that we have. So when I say that these are invaluable records, I mean, the Eliel Saarinen buildings, there were professional construction photographs taken. There's all sorts of documentations for those projects. But some of these family projects before the Cranbrook institutions, Pleasures of Life is our only record of their existence. Let's see, another goat. I should have said this was a goat tour. Cranbrook Dairy Farm, which was torn down again to build the Kingswood School. There's also the Italian Cottage, which was torn down for Hedgegate, the apartments over by Brookside. Let's see. The Glee Club at the Asheville School. What does that say? Kunitz. There's lots of swimming photos. Let's see. Early performances at the Greek Theater with all the costumes. And many of these costumes survive in the Cranbrook Cultural Properties collection. So here's a model of the Cranbrook House Library, which would be built in 1918. So this is a 1916 model of the library. And then the view from the library from the courtyard side. We are looking at Pleasures of Life number 2. Here's the Japanese garden, which would have just been coming around. Oh, here's one of these where I mentioned that he liked to do sort of collages. So you have Florence at the Summer Carnival, who is holding the model of the west facade of Cranbrook House. They don't go in quite chronological order, which can sometimes be frustrating when you're searching for something that might not exactly be indexed. For instance, I was looking for Christmas decorations, but he does not, if he didn't write Christmas in the subheading, it's not inventoried as Christmas. So I recently went through every single one of these, which is when I really learned how unchronological they go. Here you see some early snowstorms, which it has been snowing here for a couple of days. Henry Whiting II, which I don't know if Karen is watching, if that is related to your family or not. Morris on the sled. They bought a sled in Switzerland and ended up having the Cranbrook blacksmith make them a number of different sleds so that they could have races going all the way around the estate. Now, this is a trip out west to the 1915 Panama Pacific Exposition in San Diego, the World's Fair celebrating the construction of the Panama Canal. And the architect of these buildings was Bertram Goodhue, who would 12 years later be commissioned to design Christchurch Cranbrook. And it was also at this World's Fair that the Booth saw a Japanese garden for the first time, which inspired them to come back and build a Japanese garden here. The taste of a wig is not pleasant, is what Henry is learning there. What ho? So I hope you get a sense of what life was like back in the 1900s and 1910s here at Cranbrook. Let's see if we'll return from our Santa Barbara trip in Pleasures of Life number 3. There is a great instance where you're flipping through and you eventually find Shirley Temple because she was staying at the same hotel as the Booths, and so she makes an appearance in Pleasures of Life as well. Here you see some more construction photographs with iron for reinforcing the root cellar, 1917. They're a pretty invaluable resource about daily life. There's lots of car accidents and flat tires. More fun at the Greek Theater after its construction. Florence and Uncle Ralph. Isn't it amazing how the Greek Theater has no trees around it, so you can actually see straight across the hill to Tower Knoll there. And then this is is that the Rainbow Fountain? I think that's just a different fountain somewhere here. Building the shed farm. Florence looking quite tall there. And then this is the farm group that was demolished for Cranbrook School for Boys. And so if you know Cranbrook School for Boys well, this is the site of the observatory tower, and this is the site of the library and study hall. And so the farm group, which was constructed in 1911, was torn down in 1927, and the school was built on the exact same layout. The Olympian crew. The crew that beat us, Gordon York. Oh, we're back to the Asheville School now. The Detroit Navy. Yeah, so this has given you a little introduction to Pleasures of Life, construction of the Cranbrook House Library there before it had a roof on. Of course, designed by Albert Kahn. Oh, and this is a good one to end on. To Church on a Gasless Sunday, 1918. And so it's the family walking into Birmingham to get to church because they for whatever reason, have no gas. I don't know, were gasless Sundays a thing in World War I to conserve energy? But the family's walking. And then also here is On the Road to Ipsy. And these are his University of Michigan friends who are horsing around on their way back from Cranbrook to Ann Arbor. And Henry would bring his colleagues, his friends from University of Michigan, up to Cranbrook for these weekend events. And I think, yes, so here's Hill Auditorium, which would have just recently been constructed when he was at the University of Michigan. It was maybe 5 years old when these were taken. And you can see here he is with Fred Morse. And of course, if they were chronological, there's a great picture of them breaking into Hill Auditorium and sitting dangling off the roof of it. But I don't think that must be a number 4, which I didn't pull out. So I hope you enjoyed this little introduction to the pleasures of life. I know it's not the best technological situation to be looking at 100-year-old photos through a cell phone over Instagram Live, but maybe this will encourage you to go over to our website and check out the high-quality digital scans of these images. Again, just go over to center.cranbrook.edu and then click on the Archives tab and the Digital Image Database. Once you're on Content DM, you just search Pleasures of Life. And I think 1, 2, and 3, which is what I pulled out today, are online already. And I'm constantly putting a little flame underneath the archives to work on getting 4 through 13 digitized. As he grows up, as he leaves college, gets married, the albums switch from being sort of him and his family to him and his friends to him and his wife and then him and his children. As time goes on, what he documents also changes. And so it increasingly is, I think, seen through the eye of a sort of architect traveling. And so probably why they're not digitized and online is that by sort of Pleasures of Life 6, 7, and 8. It's mostly buildings. It's mostly sort of his trip to Bavaria, and here are the buildings he saw in Bavaria, and it's less of these sort of charming scenes of activity around Cranbrook. But it is a real invaluable resource, and if you sign up for not this Sunday, but the next Sunday, my tour of Cranbrook House for Home for the Holidays, which we are doing with Cranbrook House and Gardens Auxiliary, you're going to see a number of images from Pleasures of Life, because that tour, which I am leading, along with 4 of my friends at the Cranbrook House and Gardens Auxiliary, we're going to be walking through Cranbrook House and telling stories of the holidays here at Cranbrook from about 1908 to 1950. And so Laura and I went through all of these albums to pull out all of the winter scenes, all the sledding scenes, all the New Year scenes, Christmas scenes, and we're going to be using a lot of those images to tell stories as I walk through the house and as the House and Gardens volunteers are broadcasting to you live from their own house. It's going to be a great event. You can sign up at center.cranbrook.edu, and it will be an exciting and different take on the Cranbrook House tour. I will be back next Tuesday for another Instagram Live at 5. And I'll be on Facebook Live at 5 tomorrow, joining you from the Trellis Bridge, which hopefully the lights turn on the Trellis Bridge, because it is now entirely dark outside at 5:30. But it should be a great tour. I'll bundle up the Trellis Bridge in the snow with its Christmas lights on it. Is a sight to behold. So that will be live at 5 on Facebook tomorrow. The special event is on the 13th, and keep your eyes on your email, because why am I here in the reading room today? I'm already working on the History of American Architecture lecture series that will begin the last Monday night in January. So signups for that will be opening soon, and that is my favorite time of year. So thanks for joining me for another Live at 5. Great to be back with you, and I will see you either tomorrow on Facebook or next Tuesday on Instagram. Be safe.